Well, howdy, partner. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Wednesday, I believe, and I'm again joined by my friend Marianne Williamson. Hello, Marianne.
Hey, Robbie. Well, hi to all of you. Today is more of the same in terms of all the stuff going on in this country. Hopefully, by watching the show today, you'll feel a little more clear about things. We'll try. Anyway, what's on your radar, Robbie?
Let's get right to it. Some big news yesterday from my friends at the Washington Free Beacon. How about this? The federal government finally confirmed 7 U.S. military service members contracted a disease with COVID-like symptoms while participating in the Wuhan military games in October of 2019. That's 2 months before the outbreak at the Wuhan seafood market, the wet market. Now, this report lends tremendous credence to the lab leak theory of COVID's origins, undercutting the idea of animal spillover from the wet market. It should go without saying, but if people were sick with COVID 2 months before the wet market outbreak, then the wet market is not the originator of the earliest COVID cases. Now, you're probably thinking, Wuhan military games? Huh? What was that? Well, in fact, from October 18th through October 27th, 2019, Wuhan, China played host to a kind of Olympic Games for military sports, and many nations, including the U.S., participated. In fact, American participants reported at the time Wuhan seemed like a ghost town. They wondered if, for some reason, the Chinese government had maybe ordered a soft lockdown without international awareness. Wonder what that was about. Now, additionally, 7 U.S. soldiers came down with, as I said, COVID-like symptoms. Now, that doesn't mean they had COVID, of course. COVID can be hard to differentiate from the flu or from having a cold, etc. And they were not tested for COVID since at that time, we're talking about, this is before the pandemic, there are no tests. This all comes, by the way, from a Biden administration government report that was not made public despite Congress passing a COVID disclosure law that President Biden signed ordering the release of precisely this sort of information. Now it has finally been obtained years later by the Washington Free Beacon. The report notes that the Wuhan military games were held in close proximity to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where scientists were engaged in dangerous research on bats, and that research was funded by you, the U.S. taxpayers, with the full backing of Dr. Anthony Fauci. Richard Ebright is a scientist who favors the lab leak explanation for COVID's origin, saying it's very likely. He tells the Free Beacon it's an outrage that the Biden White House and the 118th Congress, Senate, and House Armed Services Committee did not publicly release this information when it became available in 2022, but instead withheld this information for the duration of their terms. Now, this should be taken as yet one more piece of evidence that when the mainstream media, expert scientists, and some Democratic politicians demonize the lab leak theory as a racist conspiracy theory, remember that? They were the ones promoting misinformation. The Energy Department, the FBI, the CIA, they all believe lab leak is the most likely cause of the pandemic. I don't know about you, but by now, I am outraged that information about COVID's potential origins is still being withheld from the American public and has been for years. Why was this report kept secret by the Biden administration? Why has the federal government not told us more about suspicions that bat scientists at the Wuhan lab were sick with COVID before the wet market outbreak took place? The Wall Street Journal has reported that. We would like to hear more about it. Who is being protected by all of this? Is it just knee-jerk secrecy? The American people deserve answers. Their elected representatives passed legislation to give them those answers. Biden agreed to provide those answers. Now Trump is president, so no excuses. The federal government needs to tell us everything, and I mean everything that is known about COVID's origins. With the potential for another pandemic, due perhaps to reckless research, the fate of the world may very well depend on these disclosures. So we have more information here, Marianne, coming from the government. There's a government report that was not released to the public, despite the clearest possible law being passed and signed by Biden saying we will disclose knowledge of COVID origins. We want to know. I want to know what was the cause of this horrific mass killing event that ruined the country, ruined the world for several years. Now we know that scientists participated in these military games at Wuhan,
Right.
and it's not service members, and they were sick.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't COVID. We don't know for sure.
Right.
We also have heard reporting from the Wall Street Journal, reported very credibly, that scientists, the very scientists who worked on the bats, got sick with disease at about the same time. So That's all very highly suspicious, and we need to know more about it, because if it is the case that people had COVID before the wet market outbreak, then the wet market outbreak was just a super spreader event like a party at a mall or whatever, or a movie theater. It was not the cause of COVID if people already had COVID before that happened.
Well, on this one, I agree with you. And I never bought the wet market. It didn't feel right to me. It always felt to me. I think lab leak feels more correct, but I think there are bigger issues here as well. First of all, anyone that doesn't, and this has been going on for a while, but particularly around health issues, anyone who doesn't fit the official narrative about health in this country is called a conspiracy theorist.
You know this
and
from
that
personal
I
experience.
do know it, and that is the way to. First of all, it's the way to actually foster genuine conspiracy theories, because when people get to the point that they know, I think there's something we're not being told here, then they stop believing anything officialdom has to say. And it's very important that on some things, including health, that we do get the straight up information. So I agree with you on this one. And I think that there are secrets. You know, they say in AA that you're as sick as your secrets. And I think that's true of a country as well. I always felt that way about like the assassination of JFK, that the fact that we never, there's something when a secret is in the air, nobody knows the truth. That's why justice is so important, that truth is ultimately determined. And I think when it comes to COVID, this is going to be a kind of toxicity for Americans until this thing gets ultimately handled. So I agree with you on this one, and good for you for keeping the story alive.
Thank you. And the other thing is, because so many of the people at the top level, you know, in the U.S. government as well, this is research that was funded by taxpayers at the direction of our own government. So it's funny when it came from a wet market was the established explanation, and that it came from a lab was like the racist conspiracy. I'm like, which is the most racially, this theory, the lab leak, we're on the hook for that too because we funded it. Whereas the dominant theory has to do with very specific Chinese cultural cuisine practices. That would be a more racially problematic explanation. Doesn't make sense.
I think it's important for everybody to know that the story goes that Obama asked the question, which he should have, if we do this kind of experimentation, could the virus leak? He was told no, and he said, shut it down.
Yes.
Then the question becomes, and this is where whether it was Fauci or I don't know, you seem to have strong opinions, I don't know, but someone went around him. If in fact it was a lab leak, then someone went around the directive of the president who had said to shut it down. And also, I think there's a bigger question, where are we as a human race that we are even doing this? And then you have, well, who would be doing it against each other? Well, probably countries like China or the United States. But then we are working together in developing these things. It is so macabre. It shows something so immoral and sick about the human race that we're even doing this gain of function and they say, well, we're trying to do it so that if it happens, but actually you are creating the conditions which actually increase the probability that it would happen.
Yes. And I keep saying this, our viewers have heard me say this a million times. If this research absolutely has to be done because it's vital for some medical reason, can it be done like in some uber safe facility in Antarctica where there's no human population nearby, or like on the moon or something, rather than in a unsafe, lab that is, assembled with faulty like walls and things? The complaints about the actual conditions in the lab were that there were not sterile surfaces, that people were just coming and going, not even wearing basic masks, and then it's in a city with a massive civilian population surrounding it. That just seems insane that you would do this research under those conditions.
The problem is there was a time when I would say, well, we should have congressional hearings about this. But even congressional hearings have become somewhat of a joke.
Yeah.
That's what's so wrong right now. Nobody knows where to look for solid righteousness. And
I don't want more hearings where it's just the same people being asked the same questions. I want disclosure of documents that the government has. So the government had this document for years. They were supposed to show us this document, and they just didn't. So there are more documents. So whatever the intelligence that led the Energy Department, the FBI, and the CIA to make their conclusions, I don't want just a summary of their conclusions. That's fine. I want to know, what did they literally base it on? For instance, the Energy Department has a lot of knowledge of how scientific laboratories in the U.S. are managed. So the fact that they made this determination is very telling, because they know a lot about laboratory conditions. So I want to know exactly, walk me through how you reached this decision, and I think that would be very illustrating.
It would be very important, but also, everything leads to something else that's a problem in America today. When I was young, if you saw on television breaking news, it's like everybody come into the living room and turn on the TV. It's breaking news. Today, Justin Bieber gets a, DUI and it's breaking news. Everything's
poor
breaking
Justin
news.
Bieber.
So the way the media
Justin
works
Bieber.
today, there's no sense of proportion. It would, even if everything you just said happened, it would just be one more thing on the news and people would continue to cut the carrots.
Well.
Okay, we got to fix all that, everybody, and the only way it can happen is if each of us, I think, takes responsibility for a more intelligent analysis.
I'm a believer. Up next, more good news for the Trump administration. The Supreme Court has allowed the mass firing of probationary federal workers. We will discuss more rising right after this. Some good news for President Trump's administration. The Supreme Court is allowing the mass firing of tens of thousands of probationary federal workers. 9 nonprofits had sued the administration to reinstate those fired federal workers, but a lower court had recently reversed the Trump administration's move. SCOTUS, however, stepped in and said, not so fast, writing on Tuesday the district court's injunction was based solely on the allegations of the 9 nonprofit organization plaintiffs in this case, but under established law, those allegations are presently insufficient to support the organization's standing.
Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson publicly dissented against SCOTUS's latest ruling. Jackson said that the Trump administration did not demonstrate the urgency needed for SCOTUS to intervene.
To be sure, there is another related lower court injunction from a Maryland federal judge that hasn't reached the Supreme Court yet. As a result, that order still remains in effect and other federal employees are protected for now.
The plaintiffs in the SCOTUS case wrote in a statement, "Despite this setback, our coalition remains unwavering in fighting for these workers who were wronged by the administration and in protecting the freedoms of the American people. This battle is far from over."
The SCOTUS legal battle stems from the Trump administration's move to fire 16,000 probationary employees. These employees part of the Departments of Veterans Affairs, Energy, Defense, Interior, Energy, Treasury, and Agriculture. As for the other injunction from Maryland, that's still in place. It protects workers who are in D.C. and also the 19 Democratic states that sued.
Senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Norm Eisen, wrote on Blue Sky that he obviously disagreed with the ruling, but that, quote, "The door isn't closed, and we'll be back in trial court tomorrow with other groups developing more grounds for relief. We will keep going."
Meanwhile, Turning Point USA founder wrote on X, Charlie Kirk, 2 big SCOTUS wins in 2 days. The court just overturned another far-left lower court order, this one an attempt to force the rehiring of 16,000 terminated federal employees. Trump is winning, and DOGE is winning.
So the issue here is that this court is clearly being very careful. I think that something is going on here more than right versus left. They're being very careful. They felt that the people who actually brought the case were not the ones who were actually at the effect of the terminations and so forth. I think, though, as Americans, we have a bigger question to ask ourselves, and that is, why is DOGE doing this? I think we all need to awaken from any delusion that it only has to do with efficiency. This has to do with taking anyone that we did not know was absolutely in on the Trump agenda, remove them and bring in only loyalists. You know, as I'm sure you're aware, the president's going to have a military parade. And the military parade in honor of his birthday. Now, when I was a kid,
isn't it coinciding with?
Yeah, it's also 200. Yes, and it's to celebrate his birthday. Okay, but even we've had anniversaries. We had the 200th anniversary of the armed forces. We had the 150th anniversary, and we normally, until this point, did not have military parades in this country, Robby. That's what they do in Russia. That's what they do in China. That's what they do in North Korea. We do not. And I was brought up to believe that that's part of what's really cool about us. The point I want to make here, however, is that when the president was stopped from doing this because of all the damage it would do to the roads, but more importantly, it would cost, back in his first term, one of the reasons they didn't do it was because it would cost $100 million then. So anybody who says all this DOGE stuff and these firings has to do with so that we're not wasting money, This, and not only the $100 million that it would cost to do this, it will cost to do this military parade to honor him. That ridiculous light show in the sky the other day about our great leader in Florida, how much did that cost? Or the millions of dollars it costs every time that Air Force One takes him down to Mar-a-Lago to play golf. So this idea that these probationary firings or any of these guttings of the federal agencies have only to do with efficiency or anything to do with efficiency necessarily, it is not efficient to gut health services. It is not efficient to gut the things that actually help the American people thrive. You know, and I love that smirk on your face. I like you, but people like us.
I'm letting you. I'm not cutting in. I'm letting you say your piece.
When I was campaigning, my slogan was disrupt the system. Whether you're on the left or the right, people wanted to disrupt the system, and also on the left and the right for the same reason. It was so financially, economically unfair to the majority of Americans. This man is not just disrupting the system. He and his cohort, this unelected billionaire, are destroying the system, and they're destroying it for a reason, and that is the question that should be on every American's heart. Why are they doing this?
To address some of those points.
Yeah. Oh,
I also do not want the federal government to spend any money whatsoever on parades or other frivolities. Why don't we get some of the tech backers of Donald Trump to contribute to some fund to have a parade?
If they want
that
to do
seems fine to me. And then we can celebrate the country with private investment. Sounds good to me. It's the 250th anniversary, so I'm fine with a parade. But yeah, I don't want the government wasting any money on that. So fine, I guess we agree on that point of it. Firing, but very early in your remarks there, you said firing people who are not part of the agenda. Trump won the election. Does he not have some right to then have the apparatus of government reflect his priorities and his wishes as the elected leader? I don't like the idea of no matter who gets elected by the people, the government operations continue and we have business as usual because there's a permanent entrenched bureaucracy that has its own ideology, a progressive ideology, its own ideology that is utterly distinct from what people vote for. I mean, I'll go back to what I talked about in my radar, which you mostly agree with on COVID origins. You know, the Democratic leadership, President Obama, others saying, don't do this research, a permanent entrenched bureaucracy doing it anyway. I would have wanted more loyalists to the president if that meant people actually doing what the guy that people voted for tell them to do, instead of just this class of experts and elites. And this is so pernicious on foreign policy in particular, where we had a continuing interventionist foreign policy of regime change and involvement in other places in the world.
That was because of the presidents, the commanders-in-chief at that time.
It was going to be the same foreign policy regardless of what.
You're just saying that. The president appoints his cabinet, hopefully one day, her cabinet. Yeah. The president appoints the cabinet. And those cabinet members are obviously people who are aligned with the president's agenda. That's why they're appointed.
Remember when Truman fired MacArthur for not doing what Truman wanted?
And then it is their job to make sure that the work being done by that office is in alignment with the directives of the president and the directive of that cabinet secretary. We do not have a government where every single person who works for the government has to agree with every little thing. They have to do their job as directed. But and also it's not only the agenda issue, it's also the destructiveness in general. It's the fact that whether it has to do with threats to Social Security, whether it has to do with Medicaid, whether it has to do with women's health, this president was saying he's the fertilization president or whatever he said. They just gutted the committee that has to do with research having to do with IVF. They are destroying government agencies here. You can talk all you want about issues that in and of themselves, reasonable, but we have to ask ourselves the bigger question: why are they trying to destroy the government here? Because that is what they are doing. They're not just disrupting; they are destroying the effectiveness of the U.S. government. What?
The government is too big and too bloated, and we need to make cuts.
That's
just
fine.
As if it was a private organization, they would let people go. They would scale back. That's what our government has to do.
You do it the way Bill Clinton did it. 450,000 people lost their jobs. It was a committee of experts, including forensic accountants.
I think if they did it that way,
this little group of teenagers who work for DOGE are not a committee of forensic accounting experts, and these are are people, and he's unelected.
Maybe we need to save the country today. We can't wait to have another audit and another review and another investigation.
Right, just ruin people's lives, ruin these
not-
agencies, gut these agencies. What does it matter? It's mainly
It's not- the federal government is not
who
a-
will suffer after all. So what does it matter?
Government employees are not poor people, and the federal government should not be viewed as a jobs program. It is not a jobs program. It is a provider of services.
I don't disagree with you.
So people losing their job, it's sad when it happens to people. In any line of work, obviously, but
I'm not
we
just
cannot
talking
view the
about
government as a jobs
traumatizing these
program.
people and villainizing these people and demonizing
I'm not
these people.
villainizing them.
They are. The letters that Musk writes, how he talks about them, how the president.
What did you do today?
Them.
That's demonizing
No,
and traumatizing
the
them?
way he tells people you're not doing a good job, who had just been given spectacular job reviews. When the president was asked, "Does this upset you?" He said, "No, most of those people weren't working anyway." My God, have you ever talked to any of these people? These people had given their lives. But you're right. It's not even a matter of, okay, so people get fired. People get fired in life. But it is affecting, and it is deeply affecting, the work that the government does that is good. You talk about it as though the government does nothing right. And I think to say the government does nothing right is as unbalanced and incorrect as to say everything they do is right and we need to keep it the way it is.
I think there's a lot of administrative bloat in government.
Of course there is, and that should be dealt with.
Because
And no
they
lefty
don't
would
have to
say
deal with
that. Pardon?
In particular, because they don't function like a private company where
They're not supposed to. We're not a business.
Okay, but I get that. But the
Do
business.
you get that? Because a lot of people on the right.
The business faces the situation where if they're not bringing enough revenue, then they have to make cuts because
No. The purpose of the government.
the government
is
can
not
always
to
bring in more
create
revenue,
profit.
and it can always print more money if it
Yes.
doesn't. So they have no. What I'm saying, they face no external pressure to be efficient the way private.
I'll tell you how
firm
you
does.
do that. I'll tell you how you do that. Tax fairly. The way you do that is don't extend those tax cuts established in 2017, $2 trillion tax cut, 83 cents of every dollar went to the highest earners and corporations. All of this has to do, this is not money that's going to go back to the people. This is money that's going to be used to extend and permanentize those tax cuts.
Good.
You want to have But then you're talking out of two sides of your mouth. You say we need money. If we need money,
No. I said I
giving
don't
money
trust
to the very, very, very richest who don't need it.
the
A
government
billionaire
takes
once
in
said
money and revenue, and they can make themselves. They can implement efficiency and have leaner agencies that spend within their means, just like everybody else.
within their means. Hold on a moment. The purpose of the government, according to the Declaration of Independence, governments are instituted to secure the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness given by our Creator.
Yeah.
A child having enough to eat, a child who cannot afford to work, child having enough to eat, people having enough economic opportunity to get into the game and to make it in the game. This government is not to be run like a business, it's to be run like a healthy family. You don't feed a child because it's going to make a profit. You feed a hungry child because it's the right thing to do. You don't take care of your old people and Social Security payments because it's going to make us money. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And in Social Security, which does pay for itself, this canard, this narrative that's being created, it's not.
Government doesn't feed children in grocery stores.
The American people
The
need to
government doesn't do
decide
anything.
whether or not this government is there to work for us or not. Because the techno-billionaires who are trying to take this whole thing over really do not feel that that's particularly convenient for their purposes. That's why this is happening, and the American people should start thinking really
But when you go in the medical care and feeding children, that's the welfare state, which is still going to exist, and we're not getting rid of the welfare state by saying such and such federal employees are going to no longer be in their jobs. That's not.
No. He is. They are absolutely threatening Social Security. They are absolutely threatening Medicaid. If you take that continuing budget resolution and you look at the $800 billion taken from the committee that would pay Medicaid, they talk out of two sides of their mouth. I mean, I understand that what you said was sincere, but it's not in alignment with what they're doing and what they're planning to.
I mean, I wish there was more political will to downsize those programs, but unfortunately there is not.
Well, given your circumstances in life, perhaps.
My circumstances
you
being
are
that I'm
not
a
yet
young person who is
understanding
not going to get any
why-
of that
what
benefit. It
Medicaid-
won't be left.
You what?
There won't be enough money left for my generation.
I know
who are
you're
that
parroting their
age.
narrative, but that's not
it's
true.
true.
All you
It's
have to do is
predicted to
lift
go
the
and
cap a
solve-
little bit.
Yes, if
Spend money. People would have to pay $1. Listen,
If we take more money
let me
from
say
people,
something.
then yes.
You and I
Yes.
are both You know, I have books. You have this show.
We are both
We have been
privileged,
fortunate in this
affluent
country.
people,
I mean,
yes.
I don't know about you. I'm not rich, but this country has been good to me. I have no problem with the idea that I then pay back money into the system that will take care of the common good. No conscious person wants to think that I'm creating wealth at the expense of other people having the opportunity to. That's how this government should work, that it fosters economic and every other kind of freedom and takes care of the common good. And if we don't take care of the common good, we're going to have a French Revolution type situation on our hands, and we don't want that.
I don't trust the government to determine what is in the common good or what is fair and what is not.
That's
And
what
at
a
the end of the day,
representative
it's not their
democracy,
money, it's
a
ours.
representative democracy is your government. The government is you. They work for you.
It's the wolves voting on how many of the sheeps to eat for dinner.
What?
Like there's nothing, that we have certain rights that we've taken off and said are not for democratic governance and for voting, because we don't put the First Amendment to a vote, we don't put the Second Amendment to a vote, we don't put any of that.
Nor should we.
Just say, right. Well, your right to keep what you earn, to me, is not so fundamentally different than your right to free speech.
So are
your
you
right
saying
to,
that income tax is basically unconstitutional? Is that your argument?
the Supreme Court has not decided that it is unconstitutional, so it is constitutional. I wish that it was unconstitutional, but
Okay.
I would
think
have
we should
like
go on to other things.
10% or 20% of your
What?
income, maybe. I think more than 20% of your income is crazy to have to pay in taxes, personally. But I know people have paid up to 70% in the history of this country. Insane.
Well, there
I
was
would
a
be
time
moving
when
to
we had
Switzerland under
much
those.
fairer taxes. You know what came along with that? A thriving middle class.
I think all of the most wealthy and productive people in our country would immediately move to Switzerland under such
But they
conditions, and I
didn't.
would
They
be
didn't
joining
back
them.
then. They didn't when there
gotta
was
read-
fair
you gotta read
taxation.
Ayn Rand,
There
you
had
gotta
been a
read- that
$50
would be
trillion
an Atlas
transfer
Shrugged
of wealth
situation.
from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. In the 1970s, the average American couple could afford a house.
No, that's not true.
It is true.
All of that is just
Yeah.
They had the average American family owned fewer cars on average. They had fewer rooms in their house. TVs cost more. They
Look
more
at the
their
percentage
paycheck
of
for
home
consumer
ownership
goods.
in the 1970s compared to now.
It's better now.
No,
It is.
it's not.
It is. No, this is a lefty talking point that's just not true. This fiction that everything was better.
It
And
is an
there's something
absolute-
conservative about it, that it was the golden age of America in the 50s. People were materially, on average, poorer in the 50s and 60s than they are today.
But no, they weren't on average
They
in
were.
terms of the relative expenses
Yes, they
and
were.
what they could afford to do. You had one person
Some
could
things
go
are
to
more
work.
expensive.
One person could go to work and that work one day and have a salary that
false.
that could support a family of four.
That is absolutely false.
It's absolutely true, everybody. Go check it out. Like go onto Google or something.
Up next, DHS and the IRS are collaborating to crack down on illegal immigration. We will discuss. There's been a bit of a shakeup at the IRS. The current head of the agency, Melanie Krause, has stepped down, per the Washington Post. The reason? She's protesting a new move from President Trump's administration.
The Department of Homeland Security and the IRS signed a memorandum of understanding Tuesday. In it, the two agencies agreed to share information for immigration enforcement. Specifically, the IRS can now share information about illegal migrants who are under criminal investigation or face deportation orders. Fox News first reported the deal.
The DHS wrote in a statement, under President Trump's leadership, the government is finally doing what it should have all along, sharing information across the federal government to solve problems. Biden not only allowed millions of illegal aliens to flood into our country, he lost them due to incompetence and improper processing.
Meanwhile, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is criticizing the move. They wrote in part in a statement, "The Internal Revenue Code, IRC, explicitly safeguards taxpayer privacy, regardless of immigration status. Under 26 U.S.C. 6103, tax returns and taxpayer information are strictly confidential and can only be disclosed under narrow exceptions that do not include immigration enforcement. If taxpayers fear that filing a return could lead to immigration enforcement, they may be discouraged from complying, reducing overall tax revenue and harming tax administration for all Americans."
Senior legal correspondent for The Federalist, Margot Cleveland, wrote on X that this is in another stage in Trump's deportation process, which started with violent criminals. She writes, quote, "This process is the explanation to those screaming, 'You can't deport 6 million people,' or whatever. And along the way, Trump is making clear to the category of those who entered illegally, leave now or you won't get back in, which will reduce the need to deport."
Meanwhile, Senator Jackie Rosen wrote, This is deeply shameful and breaks the promise that information immigrants provided the IRS to pay their taxes would not be used for deportations. The U.S. Senate must hold immediate hearings with Treasury and DHS leadership to get direct answers and hold them accountable.
What do you think about this, Marianne? Look, I'll tell you what I think. First of all, I hate paying taxes. It's tax season. Tax day is rapidly approaching. I hate it. If I wasn't a libertarian, doing my taxes would have certainly turned me into one.
Nobody loves it. We do it because we're supporting our country.
Sorry, I just became violently ill. Anyway, so while I might, I just don't love the process of being taxed.
Nobody loves it.
On the other hand, shouldn't the government have to share? Shouldn't government agencies share information with each other?
Thank you for. Oh, I thought you were going to say the opposite. No,
you're withdrawing your things.
Say the opposite.
Shouldn't they not share information?
You know, we're creating a culture of fear in this country. There are certain things that we thought we could depend on, and one had to do with the IRS.
That if you're an illegal immigrant criminal, you get to stay in the U.S.
You know, when we use this term illegal immigrant, first of all, the whole country was on for getting rid of the violent criminals, Mexican gangs, the Venezuelan gangs. Yeah. Fine, nobody had a problem with that actually. But then you're moving, every time you move, oh, it's these. First of all, immigrants in this country, including undocumented immigrants, well, really that's the conversation here, undocumented immigrants, pay over $90 billion a year in taxes in the United States. Now, when it comes to the idea that some people are undocumented because of our immigration laws, making it so difficult for people. You know, we're going to have to get to root cause analysis here when it comes to immigration. First of all, much of U.S. foreign policy over the last 50 years has actually exacerbated the problem of poverty and economic instability in the United States, in Latin America. When JFK was president, he had something called an Alliance for Progress. He was basically going to do a kind of Marshall Plan for Latin America. When Lyndon Johnson became president, he scrapped all that, and he began a phase which has been a very dark, deleterious and basically imperialistic economically phase by which we've used Latin America to actually support American corporate interests more than not. This has created a lot of the danger. Also, our drug war has created a lot of the danger. Good, I'm glad you do. So we have to ask ourselves, what part have we played and what changes do we need to make that actually continue to create the situation where so many people are trying to get in here?
I support
also, both parties failed to create the kind of immigration infrastructure at the borders which would solve this problem. And let's not forget, the $8 billion plan, bipartisan, first written by Republicans, was in place, would have made a real difference, and it was Trump who came in, told Republican leaders, don't vote for it because it will work, and it will give Biden a campaign win, and we don't want that. Trump was
right. We didn't do it, and the border crossings went down anyway.
Pardon?
Trump was right. We didn't need it. We just needed a change in attitude, I guess, because Trump coming in reversed the border crossing trend without greater enforcement or money being spent on it. They just knew that Trump means business. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Marianne. I support legal immigration. I believe Congress should act to reform the immigration system to make it easier for people to come here legally, work here, pay taxes, live above board, and we can. And if it's easier to come here legally, we won't have people, flooding across the border in unsafe conditions for them and contributing to kind of an instability on the border. That's not ideal. Want them to come here, work, contribute, be taxed, and that is all fine. And then we can vet people. If they're coming legally, we can find out if they have a criminal gang association, and then no thank you. Then we turn them away, or worse. They can't come here. That's my policy. I'm all for doing that.
But now we have millions of people who were not treated that way, who found themselves in situations. Listen, people who've gamed the system, whether they are natively born here or somewhere else, people should be held accountable. But many of the undocumented people in the United States today have been caught in a system where they could not abide by the system as it was. So we have a responsibility in this. And the idea that we are so callously just willing to throw people away, throw people out, as we talked about yesterday, there's a moral issue here. And you know what the ultimate spiritual, moral, theological question is? Does one life matter? And we're beginning to act as though we no longer believe that. And that is an undercutting of Western liberalism, and it's very, very disturbing to me.
I don't think that is the most persuasive way to sell the immigration policy we're talking about. I don't like the idea of telling people you have unearned obligations to others, or that you have some responsibility because the government's policies toward Latin America were very bad decades ago. I would say,
No.
I'm just saying this is how I sell I say it is beneficial to our nation, to our economy to grow, for goods and services to be provided, for houses to be built, for all of that, to have a labor supply, for people to come in and contribute meaningfully to the health and the growth of our country and to pay into our system. And that is good, and that is the way it's always been. My ancestors were immigrants, your ancestors were immigrants, or I don't know exactly when your ancestors came over. Mine were Italian and German immigrants who came over in the Italians in the early 1900s, and they were spat upon by everyone when they got here, and they assimilated over time, and that's just how it works. And we should keep going with that. I agree on that, because it's best for the country. So I don't like to say it in terms of you have some moral obligation to do it. No. It's in your own calculated, narrow self-interest for this country to be great, to have an immigration policy that generally lets people come in and work here and live here and pay taxes.
Well, it's interesting what you just said, because I actually agree with your economic analysis. Yes. Like I said, it's George W. Bush. I actually agree with that. But it's interesting that you feel or it's just interesting to me that we have become so far away from larger moral considerations. We fought the Civil War on Lincoln's absolute insistence that all men are created equal must be our moral guidance system. So the idea that speaking to the deeper moral issues that to me are at the core of the founding of our country, not religious, we're not talking about religious doctrine, we're talking about what makes a human being good. I think that if a human being is to ask ourselves, what is the right thing to do, then we should ask that question, what is good? That question should inform our consideration about public policy as well. Those two things together actually would be, in my mind, the winning way to go. Because ultimately, doing the right thing is better economics, because doing the right thing means doing the right thing by people. And when people thrive, they are more creative and more productive, and that ultimately creates greater abundance economically as well as every other way.
We're largely saying the same thing. We should, it's like the golden rule: treat others how you want to be treated, and don't aggress against other people. Don't coerce other people. Let other people live. I leave people alone to prosper and flourish.
That's not the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would wish. Yes. No, which is not a morally neutral argument. The golden rule is not morally neutral. What you just said is neutrality. And that is what has happened. That is what has done so much damage to the United States.
Well, now we disagree
that over the last few years, we've bought into this myth of neutrality. Too many people, I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm just doing, what creates profit for my country,
no harm.
For my company, as though ethical consideration. And you see it with these politicians too. I'm just trying to win. I'm just trying to get reelected. I'm just trying to create profit. No, we have to also ask what is the right thing to do.
Well, but if they're
we're being a good nation, we can't be a great country.
Right. My ethics would say if they're aggressing against others in the course of that, then it is in violation of my ethics.
Good.
So, it's the part of aggression that.
But sometimes doing nothing, sometimes taking this, hey, I'm just morally neutral, which is really what's happening in this conversation that you and I have been having for a couple of days about Venezuelans who were deported, who we now know had no criminal record, such as the makeup artists and so forth. Like, hey, I believe that once you start saying, hey, about any person, then it's a slippery slope.
The other guy did have not the makeup art or the hair guy or whatever,
area.
But the other person.
Listen, there are gray areas. There are a lot of these things that have been happening now, including some of the people have been picked up around the issue of Hamas, or we don't know Hamas.
I have strongly condemned the deportation of
you have to
students
work it out in
for
court. You
criticizing.
have due process, and we have to find out. You can't just get rid of them because this person's opinion is this or that. That's not the way a nation run by laws works. And the last person, you should be the deciding factor is the president, who we know changes every other minute depending on what he feels is best for him.
Up next, we will discuss the battle between Congress and the president over these tariffs with Semafor reporter Burgess Everett. More Rising right after this. President Trump defended his tariff policy before the National Republican Congressional dinner on Tuesday night. He declared the plan will actually help House Republicans in 2026, but not all GOPers in Congress are necessarily buying that.
Senate Republicans moved to curb Trump's power on tariffs, introducing the Bipartisan Trade Review Act last week. It would limit Trump's ability to impose unilateral tariffs without the approval of Congress.
The White House and Republican leadership pounced on the bill, putting a pause on it for now. Joining us to dive into the political games happening on Capitol Hill right now is Burgess Everett, the Congressional Bureau Chief for Semafor. Welcome back to Rising.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to see you. I think what everybody is wondering is behind, closed doors, how are Republican elected leaders, I guess particularly in the House and people who will be up for re-election, thinking about the impact of the tariffs. Publicly, it's with a few exceptions, it's all very, backing President Trump, not wanting to go against him. Are they much more nervous behind the scenes?
Yeah, and I think even publicly, because you hear people like Senator Tillis, Senator Ted Cruz talking about basically there's a shelf life to how long that they're willing to let the president keep going with this. I think they think that could be some temporary pain and they're willing to stomach that. And I think that translates all the way up to the top of the Republican leadership. But most of these folks that we're talking to want the trade wars to end or at least come to a pause, start making some deals ASAP. This ranges from people who have clashed with President Trump in the past to people who are some of his closest allies. So, I think that there's certainly private panic, but I think a lot of it is spilling out in public as well. I mean, the bill that you referenced, the Trade Review Act, I don't expect that to pass anytime soon, but the fact that it exists and has 7 Republican co-sponsors, combined with the fact that 4 Republicans joined with Democrats to overturn the Canada tariffs in the Senate last week, tells you, we're only 3 months into the Trump administration, and he's already issuing veto threats against a bill supported by his own party. That's a pretty fast escalation of an intra-party clash.
Yeah, the clash is illustrated by people like Elon Musk and Peter Navarro, feuding very much in public now, with Elon using some of his characteristically spicy language to describe Peter Navarro. And I see members of the administration, like Scott Bessent, for instance, will try to defend the tariffs basically by saying this is a short-term diplomatic measure in order to have tariffs go to zero everywhere, which is what Elon wants, but clearly not what Peter Navarro and more bring back the manufacturing type people, which I think leaves us with the question, but where is Trump with this? Is Trump, seeing the numbers, seeing the market reactions, he is a businessman, and saying, oh crap, there might be only so long we can do this? Or is he on the no, we gotta bring back the manufacturing? Are those people actually reading his intentions correctly? Is there any, do Republicans on Capitol Hill know that for sure?
I think that Republicans that we talked to this week, Semafor, my colleagues, had a big story about this yesterday, how Republicans are not hearing a coherent, consistent message from the administration, Trump's economic team, et cetera, who are giving them extremely mixed messages. The president himself is urging folks to be cool today. That tells me that he's going to stay the course, at least for now. Now, that being said, the president is obviously someone who pays attention to the stock market. He's tweeted about it many times. So there's no way that he doesn't know what's going on here. And he's somebody who also can change direction and change strategies extremely quickly. So that's part of what makes this so difficult. I don't know that you can 100% trust or read into too much what anybody other than President Trump is saying about this. And President Trump can change his mind on a whim and do a 180. So that being said, we're all just paying attention, I think, to what he says. And that would be the advice that I'd give anybody who's watching this super closely is what is the president saying? You can factor in a little bit what Scott Bessent is saying, what Peter Navarro is saying, but it really all just comes down to Trump, because the way he implemented this is a combination of all of these different things that his economic team has been talking about. And I don't think any other person would have done these many tariffs all together in such quick succession.
You know, the reason there's no consistent or coherent message coming out of the White House is because there isn't one. And over the last 2 days, people have begun to see that. You know, this idea that he's such a great businessman. He's bankrupted every company that he's ever been in. He is a chaos agent, including in business, and people are beginning to realize that. Everybody's down to the point of just trying to psychoanalyze what he could be thinking. You know, a sign of a good business leader has to do with stability, it has to do with consistency, and yes, it has to do with coherency. That's why all these billionaire major CEOs are trying to call the White House and saying, what is he doing? So it's interesting to me about Republican politicians because before it was all, I have to go with Trump to save my career. We're now transitioning into a time where I think it'll be very interesting whether in the next few weeks some of these Republicans will be saying, I have to break from him in order to save my career. Because if our economy continues to tank and people begin to seriously suffer, these Republicans will have more of a risk on their hands if they go with the president than if they break with him.
Yeah, and the challenge for them is that there's still Republican primaries for the midterms, right? And so if you break with President Trump before those, you risk getting a primary challenger that the president could support that could knock you off before the general election. So you see this, people in Texas and North Carolina, states that typically have early Republican primaries, they're going to have a hard time breaking with Trump until those primaries are over. So, you know, I certainly agree with the sentiment that at some point, if things don't turn around, Republicans are going to have to find independent streaks and challenge the president on these things. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think it could be not only months, it could be a year from now when the general elections start setting up. And who knows what the economy is going to look like then. So that's why you don't see Republicans racing to break with Trump, other than those who have made very clear that they are free traders and they don't agree with Trump's tariff policies from the go.
They could also go to the kind of familiar well of saying that, saying they're not breaking with Trump, right? No, Trump is still the greatest human being who's ever lived. Got to say that because I'm a Republican running for re-election. But he, a savior of humanity, but he's being, hoodwinked by the deep state that's got, he's being undermined by people with it. Like, there can still be an inner factional battle, like you're seeing frankly, with Elon Musk and Peter Navarro, that's saying, well, Trump is trying to, you're trying to sabotage Trump. No, you're trying to sabotage Trump. That's how I see this developing over the next couple of weeks if we stick with the tariff policy.
I think certainly there could be a fall guy and somebody who ends up taking a lot of the blame in the Trump administration rather than the president himself. Because as you said, it doesn't make any sense for folks who need the president's support to criticize him directly. I mean, think if you're like Senator John Cornyn, who you have Ken Paxton running against you in a primary, you're a strong general election candidate and you know that, but it's going to be impossible for him to criticize Trump because Ken Paxton is already amplifying past concerns that Cornyn made years ago at this point. So he's really under the microscope, and that's just one example of all of these Republicans that have to juggle those two things: general election waiting next November and 2026, and getting through this primary season. So I do see that there will probably be some blame that goes to the administration, but not directly to the president.
One of the problems I have with these narratives is that everybody's supposed to simply understand how difficult it is for these people to make the decision. Sometimes I feel like politicians think they're the only people who have to make ethical decisions at work. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, people are going to have to start putting their country before their party, put their country before their president. There's nothing patriotic about that. What's patriotic is doing what's best for the people of the United States, and tanking the economy it's beginning to be a less and less compelling argument every hour that somehow this is going to be good for the people of the United States. So we'll see what happens.
Burgess Everett, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Our next guest says tariffs are actually just course correcting. We have a pro-tariff guest, and we'll discuss all these policies with them. Stay tuned.
These countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything, sir.
That was President Trump speaking about his sweeping tariffs at the National Republican Congressional Committee dinner late Tuesday. His comments come as he slapped a second round of levies, including 104% on all Chinese imports on Wednesday. Trump originally imposed a 34% tariff on China, but after it imposed retaliatory tariffs on the U.S., Trump upped the amount by 50%.
Critics warn a broader trade war could ensue, but Trump and proponents dispel these fears.
Our next guest says the tariffs will course correct decades of unfair trade practices that he says did hurt American industries and cost the U.S. billions in a trade deficit. Here to make his case in favor of the tariffs is Mark Diplacido, a policy advisor at American Compass. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're really glad you could join us. There have been a lot of the hosts this week, including myself, are not so favorably inclined toward the tariff. So I want to make sure we got a perspective on for someone who supports what President Trump is doing. And if I understand correctly, you support it not just in the kind of narrow diplomatic sense of trying to get to a free trade everywhere kind of situation, but you think this is important for bringing back manufacturing to the U.S. Tell us why that is such a key goal.
Sure. Thank you. So I think the key thing to understand in the president's policy is that he's reframing trade around the idea of balance, right? For about 30 years since the WTO was established in 1994, we've had this idea that if everybody just lowered their tariff rates as low as possible, the United States really leading the world in that front, it was going to redound to the benefit of everybody. And essentially, that's not what has happened. Other countries, through a series of both tariff and non-tariff trade barriers, have driven the world trade imbalance to such a place where the United States has 78% of the world's trade deficits. Last year, that amounted to about $1 trillion. And what that means is that basically the United States is consuming $1 trillion more than it's producing. And in order to pay for those goods, we have to borrow to do it. We either sell government bonds or corporate bonds, or we sell off our assets. We sell off corporate equity and shares, intellectual property, real estate, other dollar-denominated assets that really represent our wealth as a nation. A lot of people are very familiar with the fiscal deficit and the growing national debt. That's on the spending side. On the trade side, we have these annual deficits now, and they add up to a net foreign asset position that's declined to negative $24 trillion. That essentially means foreigners own $24 trillion more in American assets than Americans own of foreign assets. So that's not putting our nation on a path to wealth. That's not a sustainable path for our country. And we've bled middle-class jobs, industry, the capacity to innovate in the future, and a lot of advanced technology manufacturing that undermines our economic and national security as a result.
The regulatory situation being what it is, I guess address my skepticism that we could seriously, restore factory work to the United States, given labor costs, given everything being more expensive here, right? These things moved abroad for a reason, because it's cheaper to manufacture things. And if you want to say for national security reasons we should not rely on X, Y, or Z country, and particularly China, for these things, I will say, okay, that makes a certain amount of sense. But the idea that we just have to build it here because we want those industries to be here, even if that's horribly inefficient, even if that ends up costing more, it makes everything more expensive, including for the middle class, for consumers, et cetera. Do you think the American people are going to be on board with that policy in the long, if it takes years and years and years to build these factories again here, have everything cost more, are they really going to put up with that?
Sure. So there's a few different responses I would have to that. First, I think, we're certainly, my organization and I am completely on board with cutting a lot of the permitting and environmental regulations that have slowed down development and manufacturing in this country, also getting energy prices down so that manufacturing remains competitive worldwide. On the labor side, I think that's the key question that American Compass and I would focus on, is that what we've chosen to do when we've opened up our global markets is to drive down the wages of our own workers in this country to compete with the third world. And that hasn't just been in things like T-shirts and shoes, it's extended to advanced manufacturing. Within that trade deficit, we went from a $40 billion surplus in the early 90s in advanced technology manufacturing to a $300 billion deficit. And so across the economy, when you offshore, when you let these industries go, you lose the expertise. And you lose a career pathway for a lot of Americans, 2/3 of which don't have college degrees, where manufacturing jobs represented the kind of stable opportunities that support families. and that offer the sort of wage structures, hour structures, and benefits that support stable lives for family formation. And so when we're looking at economy-wide at trade, we have to make sure the economy supports everybody and not just multinational corporations, not just the top decile or quintile of Americans that the system for the last 30 years has basically supported at the expense of other portions of the population.
Some of the ways that you describe our economic sickness, I think probably many people would agree with. It's the medicine that I question. How is what many people consider an almost sure path to recession, how is the risk of crashing the U.S. economy going to in any way make things better in terms of the things that you were discussing? Not only that, there are so many ways to address the kind of thing you were saying without tariffs. Why tariffs? There are all kinds of tax policies, all kinds of issues regarding free trade that we could address that do not entail this global tariff economic warfare against pretty much everyone in the world. I don't understand where you go from this is the problem to this is necessarily the correct answer.
Sure, I don't think there are really domestic policies that we can pursue that are going to fix this problem. I mean, we had two Republican administrations that welcomed globalization with Bush 1 and 2, and then we had sort of more traditional Republican policies pursued for at least the first 2 years of the first Trump administration with tax cuts and deregulation. And it wasn't enough to get this deficit moving in the other direction. Even just tariffing China alone in the Trump first administration, it decreased our bilateral deficit. But as China has adapted, it's basically started shipping its goods through these other third countries. And so we're at a point now, and the deficit continued to rise. So we're at a point now where we have to take a global approach to tariffs. We have to look at balance as a whole and create, incentives worldwide to bring that manufacturing back to the United States.
Is it also
the president hasn't? Oh, go ahead.
Is it also not the case, though, that right now there are 500,000, or I guess to be exact, 460,000 open, unfilled manufacturing jobs in the United States? There's jobs available. There just aren't enough people to do them. So creating a situation where there are even more of those jobs seems dubious to me, given that they exist. They're just currently unfilled for a variety of reasons.
There's two responses I'd have to that. First, our labor force participation rate for prime age able-bodied males has fallen from about 97 or 98% participation in the 1950s and 60s to about 88 or 89% now. There are millions of Americans, especially young men, who are on the sidelines of the economy. There are a lot of the population is also stuck in low wage or gig economy work, where they work multiple jobs instead of having a stable single job that supports a family. And I think my second point off of that is the incentives that were created by this global system. People got the message loud and clear that manufacturing and production and the trades were not going to be the future, that you either needed a college degree or you needed to go into services. What we need to do as a country is reorganize our mindset and recognize the new incentives that are going to be created by this new economy, where these are going to be where the solid jobs of the future are. And it is entirely the case that we need to retool our education system as well, to put more money into these trades, more money into production and innovation, and less into this college for all or bust model that we've been pursuing for the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, I mean,
and in our own internal polling, that's very widely understood, and that's very popular.
Yeah, I mean, you've brought up, in the course of discussing these tariffs, you've brought up a bunch of policies that I do agree with. I'm happy to put less of an emphasis on credentialism and more subsidizing and encouraging of people to get very expensive degrees for which there are not going to be jobs. I agree with that. I agree with relaxing whatever regulations are preventing it or artificially or government government directed driving up the cost of headquartering in America, all of that, but all of that is, uncontroversial in conservative circles, right? That's all stuff basically all Republicans and even some Democrats agree on doing. Whereas the tariffs are hotly, contested between, I guess, your faction and mine, the more national conservative and the more libertarian faction. And we're seeing the markets react to it in real time with just total apoplexy and horror. And I'm not seeing how there will be political will to do this for long enough to even kind of achieve the sort of thing, even if it was a good idea in the long term, which I don't think it is, but you think it is, that's fine. I don't see how we're gonna have the stomach for it in terms of and then the cost it's going to have in terms of consumer goods and the prices of everything, right? You talk about the importance of this specific class of jobs, and I bemoan anyone losing jobs or having their jobs offshored, but we are all, including those people, consumers of goods. So if we're going to make everything more expensive for everyone in order to maybe restore some jobs that there are already a lot of. You say, young men are not signing up for work. That's a problem. That's something we need to address or determine what government policy is working toward that. But you just create more openings. You don't necessarily, have people, adapt for that. How else would you respond to that, I suppose?
Yeah, well, when you shut off the incentive to offshore, right, and at the same time you're cutting illegal immigration, right, you're narrowing the labor pool, and naturally these businesses either have to adjust by increasing productivity, by increasing capital purchases and upgrading machinery, or they have to make these jobs more attractive to more people. And draw them off of the sidelines of the economy, or they have to invest more in education. They have to engage more with the communities that they're operating in to make sure the infrastructure is set up to integrate the population into the jobs that are needed. So it's about changing the incentives and the structure. And I think for too long, politicians really in both parties have wanted to offer carrots all of the time, and this is certainly on the fiscal side as well. Without implementing the necessary sticks to make sure those carrots are used to reinvest in our country. And I think we see this on the tax debate as well, where for a generation now, Republicans, conservatives want low taxes, we want small government. Absolutely. But you can't have one without the other. And I'm sure you're as concerned as I am about the now $2 trillion budget deficit we're running every year. And if we continue on the road we're on, there's going to continue to be political pressure and demand for government services and continued growth in government jobs, like under the Biden administration, where 75% of jobs created were in government or government adjacent sectors. The only way that we avoid this problem without a true political fallout is by building again and by making things in America again and pulling more people off of the sidelines of the economy to participate in that project.
You talked about political fallout, and one of the aspects of political fallout that politicians too often ignore is the reaction of other countries. We've seen this with, we're going to invade this country and they're going to love us. We're going to invade someplace else and they're not going to particularly react. Already, so much of the conversation that you've described is sort of existing in isolation, as though we're just to assume that other countries will not cause a problem. Already we've seen China, South Korea, and Japan shaking hands. We've heard Xi in China say, we're ready for war, whether it's economic or any other. Does it concern you at all that other countries are not going to just take this lying down, and that there are, in fact, all kinds of ways? Even countries like China, like Canada, that you don't normally expect tough, aggressive behavior from, these people are not going to just take this lying down. This doesn't exist within a vacuum. Does any of that concern you?
Yeah, I agree. It's going to have to be continual negotiations and continue foreign relations efforts on the part of the administration. On the other side of that, it's clear that all of these countries are lighting up the phones at the White House and are ready to make a deal. And the question, I think, is whether we're going to be able to form a trade bloc with other countries that recognizes this overall goal of balance and recognize the larger goal of burden sharing, that the United States, that it's not 1946 anymore and it's not 1989 anymore. The United States cannot prop up both the world economy with its stable currency and militarily with its defense spending. The rest of the world has to take on more of this burden, has to pay more for the stability that the United States has provided for the last 30 years, because the middle class can't afford to do it anymore. And that is a major change. That is, a conversation that's not a pleasant one for these other countries to digest. But in the long term, it's going to put all of us in a better position if we can also collectively work against China, which basically pursues these industrial policies and dumps goods on the entire world market. And countries, I think, are going to be put in a position by the administration, the way things are playing out, to either choose whether they would also like to have a stable manufacturing sector in their countries, or whether they want to partner with China that's going to continue to dump goods on the world market with the goal of dominance in the long term.
Mark Diplacido, thank you so much for coming on Rising to share your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, was the Trump administration the only one to use Signal for official government business, or did Biden's team do so as well? Oopsies, we'll discuss. The Signalgate scandal is getting even hairier. This time, all the focus is on the Biden administration. A new report shows that senior Biden officials constantly use the app for sharing sensitive, but they say unclassified, information. Now, several top staffers under President Biden's CIA director, Bill Burns, constantly use the encrypted messaging service, according to an exclusive by the Washington Reporter. The report says staffers use the app to share unclassified information with Jake Sullivan's team, the State Department, and also the CIA. Alexa Henning, a spokesperson for President Trump's Office of National Intelligence, tweeted about Signalgate when it first erupted, saying, "This story is stupid. Widespread use started under Biden as the CIA director testified yesterday. Signal was on his work device and on his desktop at ODNI. When I got my phone, it was pre-installed. The notion that you can imagine if the Biden administration did this, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, because they did."
However, former Biden White House officials have spoken out about Signalgate, saying they did not have the app on their government-issued devices. They say it would be very new and rare for Signal to automatically be available on their devices. Biden National Cyber Director Chris Inglis confirmed that experience, saying he did not recall having the app on his government phone. Okay, so this is the deal. In the first part, it said they discussed things that were unclassified. The issue of the conversation that Pete Hegseth and Mike Walton and those guys had was not just that it was on Signal, because hey, if it's an unclassified conversation, whatever. This was war plans. This was talking about what they were going to do, and I think that's the bigger issue. It probably shouldn't be happening no matter what when it has to do with government officials, but anything having to do with stuff like serious military plans, I think anybody, whether you're on the right or the left, could see the sloppiness and the irresponsibility.
Well, but there were also some accusations made that they were having the conversations on Signal because they auto-delete on Signal. Now, of course, that's not true. I found out I don't use Signal. They don't auto, you can change the settings so that they'll delete after a certain amount of time automatically, but that is not the default setting. But that was one of the lines of criticism of what they were doing. And now you have a report
that it could be, that's the point.
Now you have a report that was happening under the Biden administration, under Jake Sullivan's team, and there's some denial of it.
It's starting to happen here a lot, because I hear it not just from you, I hear it from a lot of people. Anytime you started getting into the corner here, well, Biden did it. It's like when we were kids with my mother. Peter did it, Jane did it. So I'm hearing a lot of that. Biden did it. Biden's not president now. Trump's president, and we hold accountable the president who is there.
I mean, I agree. I would like to hold accountable not Donald Trump. This isn't his fault. I would like to hold accountable the official who was responsible, who is Mike Walls, and I think he should be fired over this mistake. I've said that multiple times. I would not. Oh, we're doing a little handshake here. Yeah, I'm for accountability. I don't like circling the wagons around every official, particularly because I think Mike Walls his views on national security are not really aligned with either with the libertarian or nationalist America First consensus. He's more of an interventionist, so I'm not really thinking he's worth preserving anyway. But but Biden did it too. Yes, I understand, Marianne, that can be an obnoxious pivot when it's done either way. But, when we find out, we're told this is unprecedented, and it's like, oh, no, actually, they were using it too. And then the government says that every conversation they have is like the it's classified goes too far.
Well,
because they consider
definitely the abuse of the
everything to be
classification
classified.
system.
It's
I mean,
just
the
too
classification system was set up to protect American security. But now the government on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, anytime something would be inconvenient for them, for people to know, they just call it classified.
Certainly.
And then with the press now being mainly stenographers rather than doing the job that they're really there to do, if a reporter says, well, why is it classified? They say, well, we can't tell you because it's classified. However, in this case, anybody would understand why it should be classified, because it was war plans. And also the fact that the way they were talking, when they talked about some man who, okay, bad guy, going to see his girlfriend, and he went into an apartment building, so they just destroyed the whole building. And then you get these emojis, hey, cool, good. Not one person who would say there wasn't any way we could have taken him out without killing everybody in the building.
Yeah,
The
I agree with you on that.
People say, well, isn't this the way you would like to think that your politicians and political leaders were talking behind the scene? No, I was not impressed at all.
Well, I was not.
We agree on.
I was impressed that there was a conversation about whether to actually do this, motivated by J.D. Vance. I think Congress should have to sign off on should have to declare war on this entity, and then, we all want to see civilian casualties minimized as much as possible. The ugly reality of war is that civilians do die, and thus the decision to declare war should take into account that innocent people will die in the course of this. So is this an important enough objective that you, an elected representative who can face accountability from the public, is willing to say, yes, I'm going forward with this war, knowing full well that innocent people would die, and that takes it out of the realm of just security officials, doing exactly what you're describing, if Congress has to...
No, you cannot use, well, innocent people always die in war as a broad-scale excuse for irresponsible
No, I wasn't saying it as an excuse.
War.
I was
there
saying
are
it's
rules
something
of war. And it is reasonable, even if you're going to go ahead with the military action. And you and I agree that there should be far more of a conversation about whether or not that action was even the right action to take. Even within that, however, there should be a conversation. If you're going to take out a target, the idea that you're going to wait until he goes into the girlfriend's apartment building and takes out the whole building, it absolutely should be a conversation. You don't get to just say, well, innocent people die. That's what that collateral damage, all of that stuff that in that film a few years ago, that's what the My Lai massacre during Vietnam. I want to tell you something, youngin, because this would be way before your time. During the Vietnam War, there was something called the My Lai massacre, where some American soldiers went into a village and just massacred people. The whole country, in those days, it wasn't this major right-left thing. It was about the war in general, but not about things like this. The whole country, healthy shame, the whole country was horrified. And that's why they started changing things, embedding journalists and so forth. We need to know what goes on even during military actions because there are rules of war. And we talk about other countries that behave in ways that they shouldn't. Other countries rightfully talk about us. Even during wartime activities, we should be following the rules as best we can.
Sure. What I would say about Vietnam, for instance, is the national security objective was not nearly compelling enough to outweigh the massive loss of civilian life. Yes, it was catastrophic. But we also during World War II, we killed huge numbers of civilians in both Europe and in Japan. And unfortunately, it is the judgment of the government and virtually all the elected representatives and the vast majority of the American people that was very sad but necessary because of the. Do you know what I mean?
No
so you
gray
can't.
area on that one.
It's just And when we killed even before dropping the nuclear bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, we firebombed Japanese city, resulting in mass death.
Which is why the larger conversation should be, how do we create peace in the world?
Sure.
There should be a Department of Peace. We should not be getting rid of things like the U.S. Institute of Peace. I think a lot of Americans, Robby, don't realize peace.
Let's get rid of politicians who support war as the first cause of action.
Well, that's
what I would
damn
be
sure.
for
That's
doing.
for damn sure.
I don't know if I need another review or an agency or an institute. Let's just vote out people who say regime change first intervention first.
They're not
That's
mutually
my strategy.
exclusive. Peace, but I think a lot of people don't realize that peace creation, peace building is a real thing. You don't just treat sickness, you try to cultivate health with good nutrition and with exercise and with lifestyle decisions. Peace creation, there are 4 factors which, when present, statistically indicate that there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence or conflict. Greater education, we talked about this, greater education for children, greater economic opportunities for women, amelioration of unnecessary human despair, all kinds of conflict resolution situations. These things create peace, therefore they prevent the likelihood of war. We should not poo-poo that. We should not treat it like it's peripheral. You know, when I was a kid, your mother thought, okay, I'm feeding my family a really healthy meal because there's this big steak and then there's this little piece of parsley on the side, and that doesn't really mean anything. Well, things have changed, and we know that all the vitamins and the good stuff is in the parsley and the dangerous stuff is in the steak.
No,
we
a steak
treat
is
things that like they're peripheral if they have to do with peace creation, and we should see
No,
them.
I'm one of those like low carb paleo people who thinks that no, the steak is good. Well, the vegetables are good too.
I'm not saying the steak has no place.
Just
This
don't
is
have
not an
too much
argument.
bread.
I'm not
don't
vegan
have
or
too
anything
much.
like that.
Yeah.
Not that I would, you know.
I cook a
criticize
steak.
anyone
I
who is.
cook
That
a
was
steak
not my
once a
point.
week, Marianne.
What?
I cook a steak for myself.
But you
once
don't
a
have it
week.
every day.
No, once a week.
Oh, okay, okay, that's very, and the reason you have it once a week is because of what I just said.
Yeah.
People understand in a way that they didn't understand decades ago, like when I was growing up, that no, you don't have steak every day.
When I was a kid, they tried to force.
But you could have parsley every day.
When
It
I
would
was a
be
kid,
healthy.
you remember the food pyramid? It was
Yeah.
just a bunch of lies. They tried
Yeah.
to force bread on us, grains at all times. It was like you needed 18,000 servings of grain every day or you would die, which is the most diluted and incorrect view of all.
I know.
Ugh.
I know.
Talk about the tyranny of expertise. Next up, a related subject, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert
Speaking
F.
of health.
Kennedy Jr. is making a recommendation for how to prevent measles. We will discuss. Stay tuned. The measles outbreak that started in West Texas has exploded with more than 600 confirmed cases across 22 states and now 2 deaths, both unvaccinated children who had been living in Texas. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made a trip this week to the Lone Star State to attend the funeral service for the most recent victim of the outbreak.
He capped the trip with a post on X in which he advocated for the MMR vaccine, calling it, quote, the most effective way to prevent the spread of measles, an apparent 180 for the secretary who has previously questioned the safety and downplayed the efficacy of the MMR vaccine. Hours later, however, Kennedy made a second post on X, saying he met with 2 doctors who he called extraordinary healers and said they had used an aerosolized steroid and an antibiotic to treat measles. It's important to note, one of those doctors has been disciplined by the Texas Medical Board for quote-unquote inappropriate treatment of patients with intravenous antibiotics and other medications, unquote. Pediatric Dr. Alastair McAlpine hit back at the treatments being recommended by Kennedy, saying measles is a virus and doesn't respond to antibiotics. He wrote on X, for the head of HHS to be messaging this in the middle of an outbreak that has killed 2 children is despicable. Neither of the medications are medically accepted treatment for measles.
Well, that's fair enough, but doctors sometimes have some discretion to try and experiment prescribing different things to find out if that might help treat that disease. I mean, that's how we use medications in some cases that we already are tested and know to be safe and try different applications with them. I remember, for instance, with COVID, I mean, set aside the ivermectin and all that stuff. I remember that some doctors trying to treat it with azithromycin, which is an antibiotic. And I remember I asked someone who, because what do I know? I asked someone who's a medical journalist. Well, that makes no sense to me because it's a virus and it's antibiotics are for bacteria. I thought, and the person said, well, sometimes you try it out anyway because you can have.
Well,
so I don't see why there needs to be thunderous condemnation of just trying a safe drug in a different application. Seems silly to me.
The larger issue is, as I certainly was hoping, I think a lot of people were, that Bobby would be a kind of bridge between some of the more straight up, pharmaceutically based traditional medical models and some questions and some ideas that are not crazy that are not illegitimate, but instead it just seems to have deepened the divide. One thing
I think he's trying to do that, right?
I think he's trying. I do. I don't know what the backstory is. I don't know. But I do know this. We must take infectious diseases in children very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And I had not thought that the MMR was going to be any question. Measles, mumps, and rubella, I thought that question was settled many decades ago. So I certainly understand why people are upset at children.
But he's advocating for it, and I don't even know. People can tell me if he's been he was very against that vaccine. I thought he has said consistently that I vaccinated all of my children, that his children were up to date on the vaccine schedule. He had questions about whether it should be required and questions about the COVID vaccine and its efficacy. Now, I certainly don't agree with everything he said about COVID or even the COVID vaccine. I think some of the harms ascribed to the COVID vaccine by skeptics of vaccination have been overstated. However, I have to point out that the benefits of it were also overstated early on when everyone, including in the government and the top people, said it was going to prevent you from getting COVID, which it clearly does not.
The COVID vaccine, to me, is a very, very different conversation from the MMR.
Right.
And I think we need to keep them very, very separate.
I agree. And in fact, throwing them all in the same bucket has undermined compliance with the MMR vaccine.
Absolutely.
That's not my crazy lunatic perspective. That's what Deborah Birx said that on Piers Morgan's show a couple weeks ago. She said the way we sold the COVID vaccine was really bad because it is eroded.
Well, that's what I said earlier, that suppress information, this creates distrust. What I'd like to know is of the parents who did not give these children who died, who did not give them the vaccine, I just wonder why. Was it because they had this idea that it didn't work, or was it difficult for them to get access to it? I'd like to know what the story was there.
Yeah, instead of just screaming at Kennedy about this, how can our public health officials reckon with their own failure to the backlash against the vaccine policy that they were selling during the pandemic that has very unfortunately undermined confidence in the vaccines, because I think it's very
read an article the other day. Some of the people who have resigned at HHS have complained that Bobby was not open to a real conversation about what the science was. I think that I don't know. Once again, I think what's important is that bridge be built, and I hope that whether he has been or not, I hope that Robert Kennedy will find his way to be a real bridge.
Well, you accuse him of a lot of things. I think one thing you can't accuse him of is being unwilling to have an open conversation. He, unlike I think anyone else in the cabinet or anyone else running for president, he appeared on this show, Rising, multiple times for long stretches of time to be grilled by me and other hosts on this subject and other subjects. He made himself more available. You did as well, obviously, when you were running as a Democratic candidate, which we were very grateful for. But Kennedy, unlike many other people who sought some power to shape health policy in this country, wanted to discuss his attitudes and his views with different perspectives, which I think is a healthy tendency, even though I certainly don't agree with everything he's said or expressed or every policy even he has on health, because I want to make drugs. He's much more of a pro-regulation person than I am, for instance, because I want to speed up the process of approving. I think there can be too much red tape in there too, but we want things to be safe, obviously, and we don't want protectionism for the pharmaceutical industry. That's where I think all of us can agree.
The bigger problem for me, and yes, and I think that all people at the table should have a chance to be heard. And that's my hope for Robert Kennedy, is that he's really listening to everyone. We don't really know right now. There's a lot we can't tell what's happening in the background. But I think the larger conversation about health is, no matter what is happening over there, we will not be a healthier nation if we continue to destroy all environmental regulations. You hate regulations, but a lot of those environmental regulations are safety regulations. We cannot continue to just have all of this drilling and not expect the toxins that are produced in the air to have deleterious effects on our health. Right now, the Trump administration is gutting women's health services, so much of the medical research. So no matter what Bobby does at HHS, we will not be a healthier country if we continue to gut these agencies, including, they are even gutting the agencies that have to do with keeping our food safe. Here is Bobby trying to get rid of all of the carcinogens in our food, trying to get rid of the chemicals and pesticides that we absolutely know cause cancer. And at the same time, over here, Trump is getting rid of agencies that actually have to do with checking on the health of our food supply. So,
You need
God
an
bless you.
environmental action report to build anything in this country. It's pointless.
That's
environmental
not what I'm
regulation.
talking about.
That's
I'm
the
talking about safety
That's the kind of
regulations.
thing I want to get rid of. But the
You
backers of
just
that will
changed
say
the
that's for
you
safety.
just pivoted.
They will say
I'm
if
talking
you're trying
about
to get rid of
safety
this,
regulation.
they will accuse you of undermining safety. You're against safety. You're against the environment. If you think this need to compile an environmental action report that no one will ever read, that's about this many pages, that is just going to stop the process of building anything, postpone it for years. People can weaponize this system
Of course you
to
can
stop
on
development.
either side. But Robby, there's a complementary relationship to
Well,
be
I
had
agree with
here.
that.
It doesn't always have to be adversarial. This point is good, that there's too much and it's burdensome and people can't even build a house. And then there's points here which are very, very important, which has to do with if you completely desecrate, if you completely destroy the Environmental Protection Agency, then people will get sicker because of the terrible damage that is done to the environment by all of this drilling and all of these environmental practices. You know, if you have some factory that's going to be spewing all these toxins into the river, into the air, of course it should not be allowed. People will get sick. Look at all the cancer produced by all the PFAS and so forth. These things are statistically proven.
We need to have, I am not for getting rid of all environmental
Good.
regulation
Okay, I
or
just
having
wanna
no
make sure.
environmental protection. I just think that protecting the environment is one goal, as is being able to build things and have economic development and have energy. And it must be one concern among many, and we must
And
weigh all
economic
those
freedom
things
is
equally.
important, but the
Yes.
government should broker economic freedom with concern for the common good, and that means the health of people, particularly in poorer neighborhoods where all of these sacrifice zones are, because they build all these awful factories that are spewing all this stuff in the neighborhoods of poor people who can't fight back, and they know it. That's what's going on, guys.
Next up, a pro-Israel group is asking Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate YouTube star Ms. Rachel. We'll tell you about it. More Rising right after this. Well, here's something you don't hear about every day, the DOJ being called on to investigate children's show hosts. That is exactly what one advocacy organization wants. Stop Anti-Semitism is the group, and they're pressuring Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate popular children's YouTuber Ms. Rachel over her calls to help children in Gaza. The YouTuber has more than 14 million subscribers and makes children's content on speech therapy and learning and preschool skills. Stop Anti-Semitism wrote on X, Stop Anti-Semitism is calling on Attorney General Bondi to investigate if Ms. Rachel is being funded by a foreign party to push anti-Israel propaganda to skew public opinion. Since 10/7, October 7th, Ms. Rachel has transformed into an amplifier of Hamas propaganda, broadcasting to 20 million plus followers across her platforms. That's according to Stop Anti-Semitism. Now, others were quick to join these calls. Former Florida State Representative Ben Graber wrote back, "Not Mr. Rogers for sure."
But others are pushing back. Amani, founder of the platform Muslim Girl, clapped back saying, "You're going after a children's show host? Sure, you're definitely on the side of the people. So humiliating and desperate, even for you."
All right, so I looked into a little bit where these accusations are even coming from, and by the way, I didn't really know who Ms. Rachel is. I don't have young kids, but she is a very popular creator of online children's content. So the accusations are basically that she shared some photos on Instagram that are like, it's sad that Palestinian children are suffering, but they were photos that were not actually from the war. They were from prior to the war. Okay, that's fine. That was a mistake. There is no evidence I can see whatsoever that this is pro-Hamas, except that Hamas would also say this was not. And then second, that she's being paid by Hamas is a totally without any substance accusation to it whatsoever. Now, to be clear, the Attorney General has not said she will investigate. There is no reason to investigate. There should be no investigation. This is First Amendment protected activity, absolutely, and it is very silly. And we can't, the right and left, people on both sides of the political spectrum get targeted by activist groups around hate causes who are always trying to make it sound like hate crimes are out of control and hate is out of control on social media. And it's fine if they want to monitor those things, but their answer is always more censorship and suppression and government investigation. So this is exceedingly silly. Even the New York Post, which originated this story, seems to think it's extremely silly. And
Well,
it's
I'm
silly.
a grandmother,
Go ahead.
so I can assure you that to little kids, Miss Rachel is like God. Okay?
Really?
So the idea of her popularity is a very, very real thing. And she's an American citizen, and this is a free country. I know that's under threat right now, but this is a free country. She can have whatever views that she wants to have.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, like you said, she has a view, whether you agree with it or not. And also, I would say that groups such as those going after her about this, I don't think it's helping to fight anti-Semitism. I think it's actually helping to create more anti-Semitism. The last thing we need to look like right now, is that we would want to squelch anyone's free speech. There's nothing in what she says. You know, we've got to be so clear here that there is a distinction to be made between pro-Palestinian rights for the Palestinian people and to many people justifiable problems with this war and Hamas support.
And she didn't even say anything political. They're acting like she said, like, you know,
crazy.
From the river to the sea, pray, you know, glory to our martyrs, the Zionist oppressors must die. She didn't say anything.
Popular. She doesn't need to take money from an organization like that. That's not. Miss Rachel, we love you. I'm a grandmother. You know, we all love you.
That's pretty silly. Yeah, it's never a good idea to impute. You know, everybody who disagrees with you must be being paid off by some foreign
I get
entity.
that too.
Yeah,
George Soros is apparently sending me checks every month.
Russia's paying for me. Yeah, I was sad when all the other right-wing influencers actually did get some money from Russia. I'm like, oh, I'm not smart enough, I guess, to profit from my my views. I'm saying this for, well, not for free.
Or as a woman that's like, I don't have my own opinion. I need some.
Oh yes, well, there is that. Okay, well. Fun story. Thank you so much for watching today on Rising. We appreciate it. It does, in fact, do it for today. I will be back tomorrow, I believe, with Niall. Marianne, we've loved having you these last couple of weeks, and you're off to Europe, I believe, for a nice trip.
For that new grandbaby.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you so
Have
much.
fun, and that should be very exciting. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.